Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rainer and Rainier Books, my bookish channel, where I speak about books written or translated into the English language. Written in English or translated into English. I'm from Stockholm. I live outside Stockholm in Farsta, south of Stockholm, and I want to bring you the 10 best fiction reads that I had during the year of 2022. No time to get wasted. Let's get started. I read about 50 books this year, and this is not much, I know it. Maybe not even enough to qualify me as a booktuber, I don't know. You be my judge. But among these 50 books that I've read, I picked 10 which I thought were really outstanding reads. That every book that I present now is highly recommendable. We start with one of the lower numbers. I haven't place them all in a ranking, but one of the lower numbers in the 10, which is still very, very highly recommended, as I say, is Monica Ali's novel Love Marriage, which plays out in London. It's a story about Yasmin Gorani, a young 26-year-old Bengali English woman who is going to be a doctor. She's educating herself to be a doctor. She is engaged and soon to be married with a guy called Joe Sangster, who's also a doctor. Joe is the son of a very rich and very influential feminist progressive woman living in or on Primrose Hill in London. We meet them on an evening where they meet each other to discuss details of the wedding. Things are going to happen that are really crazy in this book. It turns out that Joe has a therapist, and the problem that he has is his sex addiction that he hopes to cure by marrying Yasmin, but he still has this sex addiction. Then we have the father of Yasmin, a conservative Bengali man, a doctor as well, who is asking a lot of things from his children, who's investing a lot of money in his children. His son is sort of disappointing him because he's not doing much. He wants to be this, or he wants to be that. He doesn't really finds a decision or path in life, whereas Yasmin is his favorite child, of course, because she's going to be a doctor like him. So we see a lot of cultural differences here in this book that still exist in London, still exist in England, between these two families, the one British or English, the other one Bengali British. And we see a lot of characters floating around, having their internal problems, their internal disputes. And this is a very entertaining book, but it also depicts a picture of Great Britain or England or London of the 2020s that is very unique. Andrew O'Hagan, one of my favorite Scottish authors, wrote, "I have loved every one of Monica Ali's books, and Love Marriage is her best. Ali writes like an angel who's not afraid of the devil." Highly recommendable, around 500 pages. Then I have the best book that I ever read by a millennial or millennial literature, whatever you might call it. I was always disappointed when I read these books, but this year I encountered a book that totally convinced me. It was nominated for the long list, was on the long list of the National Book Award. This is All This Could Be Different by Sarah Tankam Matthews, a debut novel by an author who originates from India, who has moved to the United States. And in this story, in this novel, we meet a young character called Sneha. Sneha has exactly the same background as Sarah Tankam Matthews, parents from India, living in the US. Her parents moved to the US many years ago, but then something bad happened because Sneha's father lied to the immigration. And what happens in the US when you lie to the immigration, they're going to throw you out of the country without the chance of coming back. So Sneha is alone. She has fulfilled her college studies. She gets her first job in a corporate firm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And she struggles in the beginning to get herself a social life because she doesn't know anyone in this new town, but then she starts getting to know very interesting people. She has a very bad landlord who's criticizing her all the time for every noise that happens in her apartment. But on the other hand, she sort of starts to develop herself and her own character. She starts dating women. She thinks about what her parents might think about that. her conservative parents in India. She has a beautiful relationship to a young woman, and which breaks apart and then comes back together again, and the usual stuff. It's the usual stuff, but it's a cast of characters in this novel which takes us to the economic crisis of 2008, 9, and 10, because first Sneha is very well suited financially as well, but then with the economic crisis she gets soon very deep problems. She's sending back money to India, she has to finance her life, and the economic crisis is threatening to evict her. She's threatened by eviction, she actually gets evicted, and what happens to her we learn in this book. All This Could Be Different by Sarah Tencom Matthews, a beautiful book about the millennial generation. The next one is from Canada, or from a Canadian-American author, Alex Oline, one of my favorite Canadian authors. She has convinced me totally a few years ago when I read her amazing novel, Dual Citizens, about the life of two sisters in both Canada and the United States. And now she published in 2021, actually already, her short story collection, We Want What We Want. And in these 13 stories that are we are meeting people who are in certain situations in their lives where they have problems with their identity, problems with their relationships. And Alex Oline is telling these stories with great inventive art. She really knows how to craft a story, how to plot a story, and how to handle characters so carefully that each and every one of her babies, of her characters, is treated very, very well. There's one story that was mentioned by the publisher when you read the blurb of this book, and that is Money, Geography, Youth, about a young woman coming back from a social year in Ghana to North America to find out that her father has actually moved in, that her best childhood friend has moved in with her father in order to marry her father. Or you have the story The Point of No Return, where Oline watches the relationship, describes the relationship, the friendship of two women who meet each other only 4 or 5 times over the course of several decades, but who have a very intense relationship. Alex Oline, I still adore her. She's a great writer. Like the New York Times Book Review here says, Alex Oline is a sensitive writer, alert to the look and feel of things and to the comedies and contradictions of her characters' obsessions. Great book. We Want What We Want, and also with a yellow cover. And we continue with yellow covers. The fourth one to mention here is coming from Argentina, from one of my favorite publishers, Charco Publishing in Edinburgh, in Scotland. They only publish Latin American books in English translation, from Spanish to English, or from Portuguese to English. And this one is from Spanish to English, translated by Francis Riddle from the Argentinian Spanish. This is Claudia Pinheiro and her novel Elena Knows. Elena Knows is a very short novel. It's about 175, 180 pages. This is the story of a woman, Elena, in her 60s in Buenos Aires, Argentina, who suffers from Parkinson's disease, who's not in the beginning of that sickness, but pretty progressive, aggressive Parkinson's disease. So mostly she sits at home because she cannot handle her daily life anymore. But then her daughter commits suicide, or that's what the authorities tell her. That's what the priests, the church tells her, that she hung herself on in a bell tower in the church. But Elena Sabre in Spanish, Elena knows that this is not true, that her daughter must have been murdered, because her daughter would never commit suicide. This is a book where Elena, with all her remaining power, all her remaining energy, which is very hard for her to gather, it's very hard for her to put one feet in front of the other with this sickness that is sort of threatening her, that to get information and to get proof that her daughter has been killed, because Elena Sabre, that her daughter Rita must have been murdered. I don't tell you what really has happened with Rita, but I can tell you that Claudia Pinheiro has been named the Hitchcock of South America. This is a very psychological novel, a very unusual character protagonist in the focus of the novel, and it's great writing by this author who's not only one of Argentina's most famous authors, but also an activist for human rights, and especially an activist for feminist for women's rights in Argentina and the other South American countries. Let me look at my Okay, the next book is a book that I enjoyed. It's Christmas and a book about Christmas. This is called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, the Irish author Claire Keegan. It's also a very short novel, about 130, 150 pages, if I remember it right. This was published last year. Claire Keegan's novel was nominated for one of the big awards this year. And Small Things Like These is the story of a coal merchant in a small Irish town. This is a story about a coal merchant, Bill Furlong, who is doing his duties in the weeks before Christmas. He's delivering coal to people, delivering coal to his neighbors, to people that he doesn't know, to all his clients and customers. He's on the same side, he's living with a beautiful family with 4 daughters and a beautiful wife, and they live happily with each other. But then suddenly he comes to the monastery, to the nunnery, where nuns are living, and from one of the rooms there, he hears somebody crying, and he finds out that this is a very a young girl, a young woman, dirty and in this great despair, crying for help, very lonely, and Bill Furlong has to decide if he's going to help this girl or not. Because there's a secret that is lying like a layer over this town, and the secret could be called Catholicism, the church that is ruling, and you don't question what the church is doing. And in the background is, I think never mentioned in the novel by its name, the story of the so-called Magdalen laundries in Ireland, where the Catholic Church has used thousands of young girls and women as slave laborers in their laundries, the so-called Magdalen laundries, where also hundreds of Irish women have died, actually. Well, a great story by Keegan, who is writing this very subtle, very poetic. You have this feeling that you read a Christmas story, but it's not. It's way beyond a Christmas story. It's much darker than you might think. The next book takes us to Oakland, California, to a city which I would love to visit. You know, it's, if you're not from California, it's almost a sister city of San Francisco. Travel over the bridge, over the Bay Area, this bridge there, and you get to Oakland or to San Francisco on your way back. And this is a city where a lot of shootings happen, a lot of violence, one of the most violent cities in America, mainly because the districts in East Oakland. And this novel plays out in East Oakland. It's called Nightcrawling by Leila Motley. And it was published this year in June. It was a literary sensation in the United States, a bestseller. Oprah Winfrey had it in her book club. And many, many people, all American television, invited Leila Motley into their night shows because not because, but one of the reasons is, of course, that Leila Motley is only 20 years old now, and she started writing this novel when she was 16 years old. She finished it actually when she was 17, and now it was published when she was 19. It's a great work about a young Afro-American woman in this suburb in East Oakland where the swimming pool that exists in the area where she lives is full of feces of dogs. It's never cleaned, and where lots of people are drug addicts, where there's no hope actually. And Clara Johnson, she's trying to do her best out of this situation. She's a teenager. She should actually have parents who help her, who support her getting a good education, having a good life. But what she has to do is barely to make her and her older brother Marcus survive. Her brother Marcus is dreaming of becoming a rapper. He has no sort of sense for the reality and for the dire need of money that this family, these two siblings are, because they are threatened by eviction. They are going to be evicted in 1 or 2 weeks by their landlord. She's also taking care of the neighbor's son who's 9 years old because his mother is a drug addict and she's not capable of taking care because the drugs are the main thing in her life. So Clara is living a very difficult life until she slides into night crawling, into prostitution by chance, which gives her the opportunity to make some money, but in the worst possible way. And she also gets used and abused by policemen who use her, who buy her, who sometimes don't pay her any money for sexual favors. So finally, the police starts an investigation into the policemen who have abused women in East Oakland. But one policeman commits suicide, and well, Clara Johnson is in the middle of these things. She has to go to trial. She has to go to be a witness to the court, and she doesn't know how her life goes on. It's a story about a young woman who needs actually a family, who needs shelter, who needs harmony and love, but who is, like so many real women and real girls are in these circumstances in the United States and elsewhere, is forced to meet the rough and ugly side of life in her early teens, and what this makes out of her. You can read in the book Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley, a great debut of powerful, energetic, and also very aggressive debut about the situation that Leila Mottley says no girl, no woman should face. We are continuing with a novel called Middle England by Jonathan Coe that I read from the library. Middle England was published in 2018. It won the Costa Award in the Great Britain for Best Novel in the year of 2019, one of the last Costa Awards. And this is about actually a sequel to other novels with almost the same cast of characters, which I didn't know anything about. You can read it as a standalone, which I did, and it worked perfectly well for me, and it put this book up to number 4 of my list of best books of the year in 2022. So Middle England is about Middle England, which is an explanation for the conservative or center part of the political spectrum in England, but it's also referring to Birmingham, which lies in the Midlands, and to London, I think, because it plays out in both of these cities. We have Benjamin Trotter, a man who is semi-retirement, who is writing a novel, has written an enormous novel, about 1,000 pages, which actually is going to take him to the Booker long list, which he never expected. He never expected to publish it, written it for many, many years, but he is sort of one of the most important pieces in his family. We have Sophie, his niece, who has traffic issues, who has to go to traffic safety lessons, and her instructor, Ian, whom she meets in that safety lessons, falls in love with her. They fall in love with each other, and they live together with Ian's mom, Helen, who is an advocate for Brexit and against immigration. So we have all these opinions that are circling around in the 2010s in England, and they are meeting each other in the form of characters, in the form of persons. And Coe is an author who is able to build a novel like that, who's painting a picture of England in the 2010s with the Olympic Games, with riots in Tottenham, 2011, with the Brexit discussion, and finally also with the poll that actually led Great Britain on the path to leave the European Union. So this is a wonderful novel by Jonathan Coe with an amazing cast of characters. We are up to the last 3 books. I can't decide which one I want to favor most here. Let's start with this one, Laird, Hunt and Zorri. It was on the National Book Award shortlist in the United States in 2021. I read it this summer in Portugal. This is Laird Hunt, an author I haven't read anything from before. And Zorri Underwood is a woman from Indiana, from the Midwest, from the heartland of America. We meet her as a very young woman marrying a guy who becomes a soldier in the Second World War, but he never comes home. He gets killed in the Second World War. So she's a very young widow, And Zori is living in that community in Indiana where she actually comes from. She has a small farm. She lives the farmer's life. She has beautiful friendships with her neighbors. She gets a lot of problems with economy, with people who pass away. She has a lot of grief in this novel. It's just the usual way of life and the usual way of a simple life, Zori Underwood's life here in the United States. This is a beautiful novel that has been compared to the writing of Marilynne Robinson, of Elizabeth Strout, and it's really, again, a virtuosic portrait of mid-century America itself, as the New York Times have said so beautifully. And it is a novel that's going to make you cry, I promise. So number 2, or top 3 at least, I don't know if I want to call it number 2 or number 1 or number 3, is Canada by Richard Ford. A novel that is telling us the story of Del Parsons, a young boy in his teens, 13, 14 years old, who starts this book with a famous sentence that's quoted very often. First, I'll tell about the robbery our parents committed, then about the murders which happened later, which splits the book into 2 parts of like 300 pages, because the 200 pages each. First one is the robbery that the parents committed. Second one is the murders that happened later. And this first part plays out in Great Falls, Montana. It's the story of a young boy who doesn't understand why his parents committed this robbery, and who tries even to figure out why they did it decades later, when he works as a teacher, as we find out later, in Canada. These were the events that shaped his life, that were the key event, was the key event of his life, was actually when his father and his mother robbed a bank in Montana, or was it a neighboring state? I don't remember that well. Then the children split, and the girl goes to San Francisco, and the boy, Del Parsons, the protagonist of this novel, goes to Canada, to Saskatchewan, where he works with a man, lives with a very dangerous man, a very charismatic man as well, called Arthur Remlinger, and murders are being committed, which I won't spoil here. But this story, the depiction of this life in this book, where Ford describes the life of this boy, Del Parsons, from the scene from the situation where his parents committed the robbery, or the weeks before, and the weeks and months after that, when the 2 murders happened in Canada, is such an intense portrait, very literary language, very beautiful language, very detailed descriptions of characters, but also of landscapes, of situations, of surroundings, and of people that I deeply, deeply enjoyed. And Richard Ford is an author to reckon with. That is at least my opinion. All the Lovers in the Night is the last book that I want to mention here. Maybe my favorite read of the year 2022, by Mieko Kawakami, Japanese author. Translated, the 3rd novel into English, translated from the Japanese by Sam Bett and David Boyd. What a novel. This was published in the summer this year, 2022. It was... It's the story of a proofreader, Fujiko, who lives a very lonely life in Tokyo. Her life is proofreading, correcting the mistakes, sending the file to the publishers, to her editors, and eat and sleep and work the next day. She absolutely does nothing in her spare time, in her free time, until things happen. A man comes into her life, maybe love comes into her life, but it's a very weird and odd relationship that she has to a much older man, a mathematics teacher, as he claims. They have like dates and meet in a coffee or tea house each Sunday, talk about space, talk about light, the wonder of light, things like that. And then this man disappears, and Fujiko has started drinking a lot. She drinks a lot of alcohol. She gets into big problems, and the story seems to become sadder and sadder and poorer until something happens, which I won't reveal. All the Lovers in the Night, with a very positive ending. It's a very sad and lonely novel most of the time, but it leads to an enormously convincing and beautiful ending that sometimes happen in real life and sometimes happen in books like All the Lovers in the Night. Mieko Kawakami is a master of an author. She has also written Breast and Eggs, and she has also written Heaven, which I dearly loved last year. One of my favorite books of 2021 was Heaven. And this year it's All the Lovers in the Night. These were my 10 books. So thank you very much for watching this video. Leave a comment down below about your favorite 10 books of this year and drop me a line. There will be a little more videos about the year that is slowly passing away or slowly drifting away from us and slowly going into the history books. So stay tuned to the channel. Thank you very much and bye-bye.